The rifle shots shattered the pre-dawn stillness, and Josephine Zimmerman bolted upright in her bedroll, heart hammering against her ribs as rough voices and the thunder of hooves surrounded her small mining claim in the Arizona Territory darkness. She scrambled to her feet, fingers fumbling for the pistol her father had taught her to shoot before consumption had stolen him from her 3 months ago. The September air bit cold against her skin as she peered through the gap in the canvas tent she had been calling home since arriving in Vulture City. Dawn was just beginning to paint the eastern sky with streaks of rose and gold, but the beauty was lost on her as she counted at least 6 riders circling the claim that represented everything she had left in this world. "We know you are in there, woman," a gravelly voice called out. "Come out peaceful and we will make this easy. This claim belongs to the Garrett Mining Company now. You got no business working a man's stake." Josephine's jaw tightened. Her father had registered this claim legally, and the paperwork was filed proper at the assayer's office in town. She had witnessed it herself, had stood beside him as the clerk stamped the documents. After he died, she had filed the inheritance papers, paid the fees, and kept working the shallow vein of gold he had discovered in the rocky hillside. It was backbreaking labor for a woman of 22 who had grown up in Philadelphia society, but she had learned quickly. Hunger and homelessness were powerful teachers. "This claim is legally registered to Zimmerman," she called back, proud that her voice did not shake despite the terror coursing through her veins. "You have no right to be here." Harsh laughter answered her. "Rights don't mean much out here, sweetheart. Now come on out before we have to come in and get you." She heard the unmistakable sound of rifles being cocked, and her breath caught in her throat. The pistol in her hand felt suddenly inadequate, a child's toy against the arsenal she could hear surrounding her tent. She had 6 bullets. They had rifles and ropes and the advantage of numbers. The canvas behind her suddenly ripped open, and rough hands grabbed her arms. She screamed and fought, but the man who had circled around behind her tent was twice her size, his breath reeking of whiskey and tobacco as he dragged her out into the growing light. Her pistol fell into the dirt as she struggled, kicking and clawing at her captor. "Feisty one," the man holding her laughed, his fingers digging into her arms hard enough to bruise. "Maybe we will have some fun before we run her off." "Just get her out of here, Dutch," another man said, clearly the leader. He sat astride a bay horse, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. "Burn the tent and fill in whatever digging she has done. The boss wants this claim cleared by noon." Josephine's stomach dropped. Everything she owned was in that tent. Her father's pocket watch, her mother's wedding ring, the few dollars she had managed to save, the deed papers. "No, please. At least let me get my things." "Should have thought of that before you decided to play minor," the leader said coldly. "Tie her up and leave her down by the creek. By the time she gets loose, we will be long gone, and she will know better than to come back." The man called Dutch started dragging her toward a horse, and Josephine fought harder, genuine panic setting in now. If they burned everything, she would have nothing. Not even proof of her legal claim. She would be destitute, homeless in a town that already looked at her with suspicion for daring to work a claim alone. And then she heard it. A sound like distant thunder, but rhythmic, purposeful. Hoofbeats coming fast from the direction of the mountains. The claim jumpers heard it too. Dutch's grip on her arms loosened slightly as he turned to look, and the leader sat straighter in his saddle, hand moving to the rifle across his lap. The rider burst into view like something from a legend, and Josephine's breath caught for an entirely different reason. The horse was a massive buckskin stallion, and the man astride it was even more imposing. He had to be well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they blocked out the rising sun behind him. Long dark hair flew behind him as he rode, and even from a distance, she could see the powerful muscles of his arms and chest beneath a worn leather vest and simple cotton shirt. His jaw was strong and shadowed with several days of beard, and his eyes blazed with a fury that made even Dutch take an involuntary step backward. The mountain man did not slow down. His horse thundered straight toward the group of claim jumpers, and at the last possible second, he vaulted from the saddle with athletic grace that seemed impossible for a man his size. He hit the ground running, and before the leader could even raise his rifle, the mountain man had grabbed the barrel and yanked the man clean out of his saddle. The leader hit the ground hard, the air exploding from his lungs. The mountain man tossed the rifle aside like it weighed nothing and turned to face the other riders who were fumbling for their own weapons. "Leave," he said, and his voice was like rolling thunder across the rocky terrain. "Now." "There are 6 of us, you fool," one of the mounted men snarled, finally getting his rifle up and aimed. "You got no weapon and no sense." The mountain man's smile was dangerous. "I got all I need right here," he said, holding up his massive scarred hands. "And I'm thinking 6-1 sounds about fair for the likes of you." Dutch had released Josephine entirely now, going for his own gun, but the mountain man moved like lightning. He covered the distance between them in 3 long strides, caught Dutch's wrist before the gun cleared the holster, and twisted. There was a sickening crack, and Dutch screamed, dropping to his knees as his broken wrist hung at an unnatural angle. The mounted man fired, but the mountain man had already moved, throwing himself sideways and rolling. He came up beneath another horse, spooked the animal with a sharp slap to its hindquarters, and when the rider fell, the mountain man caught him in midair and slammed him into the rocky ground with devastating force. 2 more riders charged him, and Josephine watched in amazement as this mountain of a man fought them both. He ducked beneath a rifle butt aimed at his head, grabbed the rider's leg, and upended him. The other rider had a rope, tried to lasso the mountain man like he was a steer at a rodeo, but the mountain man caught the rope in both hands and yanked. The rider flew from his saddle, landed hard, and did not get up. The leader had recovered by now, drawing a long knife from his belt. He lunged at the mountain man's back, but somehow the bigger man sensed him, spun, and caught the leader's knife hand in one massive fist. For a moment they stood frozen, the leader straining with both hands to drive the knife forward, the mountain man holding him off with just one hand, as if he was no more troublesome than an annoying child. Then the mountain man's other fist came around in a devastating arc that connected with the leader's jaw. The sound was like an axe hitting wood, solid and final. The leader crumpled, the knife falling from nerveless fingers. The last 2 riders still mounted had seen enough. They wheeled their horses and took off at a gallop, leaving their companions behind. The men on the ground, those who were still conscious, scrambled to catch horses and follow, supporting Dutch between them as they fled. The leader came around last, shook his head groggily, took one look at the mountain man standing over him with fists still clenched, and ran for his horse like the devil himself was chasing him. Silence fell over the mining claim, broken only by the sound of retreating hoofbeats and Josephine's ragged breathing. She stood frozen where Dutch had released her, unable to process what she had just witnessed. This man, this stranger, had driven off 6 armed men with nothing but his bare hands in a fury that had seemed almost supernatural. Now he turned to her, and she saw that fury drain away, replaced by concern. He approached slowly, hands open and non-threatening, as if she were a skittish horse that might bolt. "Are you hurt, miss?" His voice was gentle now, completely at odds with the violence he had just displayed. Josephine shook her head, then realized that was not entirely true. Her arms throbbed where Dutch had gripped her, and she was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. They were going to burn my tent, my claim. They said they would tie me up," and she could not finish the sentence. Now that the danger had passed, delayed shock was setting in. Her knees buckled, and the mountain man moved with that same impossible speed, catching her before she hit the ground. He lifted her as easily as if she weighed nothing at all, and she found herself cradled against a chest that felt like warm granite. "Easy now," he murmured. "You are safe. They are gone, and they will not be coming back." "You do not know that," she whispered. "They said they work for the Garrett Mining Company. That is one of the biggest operations around Vulture City. They will come back with more men." "Then I will be here when they do," he said simply, as if it was the most natural thing in the world to risk his life for a complete stranger. He carried her to the overturned chair near her tent and set her down gently. She watched as he moved around the camp, righting the supplies the claim jumpers had scattered, checking to make sure her tent had not been damaged beyond the tear in the back. His movements were economical and purposeful, and she found herself mesmerized by the play of muscles beneath his shirt. He was without question the most physically powerful man she had ever seen, built like the miners who swung pickaxes all day, except even larger, even more imposing. But there was a gentleness in how he handled her belongings, a careful respect that made something warm unfurl in her chest, despite the lingering fear. "Thank you," she finally managed. "I do not even know your name. I am Josephine Zimmerman." He turned to face her, and she got her first good look at him in the growing daylight. He had the most striking green eyes she had ever seen, like sunlight through spring leaves, and they studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. His face was weathered from years spent outdoors, strong and handsome in a rugged way that made her Philadelphia suitors seem like soft children by comparison. "Zachary Livingston," he said, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture that was oddly courtly coming from such a rough-looking man. "Most folks just call me Zach. I have a cabin up in the mountains, about 5 miles north of here. Was heading into town for supplies when I heard the shots." "You came to help someone you did not even know," Josephine said softly. "That was incredibly brave. Incredibly foolish too, but mostly brave." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, transforming his face from intimidating to something that made her heart skip. "My ma would say foolish and brave are often the same thing. She was usually right about most matters." "Was?" The smile faded. "Died when I was 15. Cholera outbreak. My pa went the same winter. Been on my own since." "I am sorry," Josephine said, and meant it. She knew the particular ache of losing parents, the strange, untethered feeling of being truly alone in the world. "My father passed 3 months ago. Consumption. My mother died when I was 12, so it has been just the two of us for a long time. He brought me out here hoping the dry air would help his lungs, but we arrived too late." Zach studied her with those penetrating green eyes, and she had the unsettling feeling he could see right through her brave facade to the scared, exhausted woman beneath. "This is your claim, then? Legally registered?" "Yes. My father found the vein before he died, and I filed the inheritance papers properly. But the Garrett Mining Company has been buying up all the small claims in this area, and they do not take kindly to people who refuse to sell. I told their representative that this claim is all I have, that I cannot just give it up, and he said I would regret my stubbornness." She gestured at the scattered camp. I suppose this was what he meant. Zach's jaw tightened, and she saw that dangerous fury flicker in his eyes again. "No man has the right to drive someone off legally held land. I do not care how big his company is." "The law does not seem to matter much out here," Josephine said bitterly. "Or at least, it does not matter when you are a woman alone." He studied her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression, a decision being made. "You are not alone anymore," he said quietly. "Not if you do not want to be." Josephine's heart stuttered. "I do not understand. I will stay here, help you work your claim, and make sure those men do not come back. You have my word on that, Miss Zimmerman." "Josephine," she corrected automatically, then shook her head. "I cannot ask that of you. You said you have your own place in the mountains, your own life. I have no right to involve you in my troubles." "You did not ask. I am offering." He moved closer, crouching down so they were at eye level, and the proximity made her acutely aware of just how large he was, how solid and real and utterly male. "Truth is, I have been alone in those mountains for near about 8 years now, trapping, hunting, trying to convince myself I prefer solitude, but I think maybe I've just been waiting for a reason to come down." The honesty in his voice, the vulnerability beneath the gruff exterior, made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. "Why would you do this for someone you just met?" "Because you remind me of a sparrowhawk I once found caught in a fox trap," he said, and his lips quirked in a small smile. "Tiny thing, fierce as hell, fighting with everything it had even though it knew it was beat. I got it free and nursed it back to health, and when I finally released it, it circled back 3 times before flying off, like it was saying thank you." "You are comparing me to a bird," Josephine said, but she found herself smiling despite everything. "A fierce bird," Zach clarified, "one that deserves a fighting chance. So what do you say, Josephine? Will you let me help?" She knew she should refuse, knew that accepting help from this stranger could complicate her life in ways she could not predict. But when she looked into those green eyes, she saw sincerity and strength and something else that made her pulse race. And more practically, she knew she could not hold this claim alone. The Garrett Mining Company would come back, and next time they might not give her a chance to defend herself at all. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I would be grateful for your help. But I cannot pay you much. The claim is not producing enough yet for me to afford a partner or hired help." "Do not want your money," Zach said, rising to his full imposing height. "Just want to make sure you stay safe and get what is rightfully yours. That is payment enough." Over the following days, Josephine discovered that Zachary Livingston was a man of his word. He rode back to his mountain cabin and returned with supplies, tools, and a determination that matched her own. He set up his bedroll a respectful distance from her tent, always conscious of propriety even in this rough place. And when the sun rose each morning, he worked alongside her in the rocky hillside, his powerful frame making the labor look almost easy. She learned things about him in the quiet moments between swings of the pickaxe, that he had come west from Missouri after his parents died, unable to bear the memories their farm held, that he had lived with a Shoshone tribe for 2 years, and they had taught him to track, to read the land, to fight with his hands in their traditional wrestling style, that he preferred the company of mountains and animals to people, but when he spoke to her, his voice was warm and engaged in a way that suggested he was reconsidering that preference. And she told him about her own life, about growing up in Philadelphia society, about how her father's business had failed and they had lost everything, about the desperate journey west and the painful final months of watching her father fade, about her determination to make something of this claim, to prove that she was more than just a society woman playing at mining. "You are not playing at anything," Zach said one evening as they sat by the fire, eating the rabbit he had snared and she had roasted. "I have seen plenty of miners in my time, and you work harder than most of them. You have grit, Josephine, real grit." The praise warmed her more than the fire. In Philadelphia, men had complimented her dancing, her complexion, her needlework. But no one had ever praised her strength, her determination. It felt like being truly seen for the first time in her life. "I learned from necessity," she said. "When my father got too weak to work, I had to learn fast or we would have starved. Funny how capable you become when there is no other choice." "It is not just necessity," Zach insisted. "Plenty of people give up when things get hard. You did not. That is strength, and it is rarer than gold." Their eyes met across the fire, and Josephine felt something shift between them, an awareness that had been building since the morning he had saved her, growing stronger with each passing day. She noticed things about him now that had nothing to do with gratitude. The way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, how his rare smiles transformed his stern face into something breathtaking, the gentleness in his scarred, powerful hands when he helped her over rough terrain. And sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart race, like she was precious, like she mattered in a way that went beyond simple protection. On the 8th day, the Garrett Mining Company came back. Josephine was inside her tent changing into a clean shirt when Zach's warning shout brought her running outside. This time, there were more than 6 men. At least a dozen riders approached the claim, led by the same man from before, his jaw still purple and swollen from where Zach had hit him. "You got lucky last time, mountain man," the leader called out, "but I brought enough men today to make sure we finish this. Last chance to walk away peaceful." Zach stood at the edge of the camp, and Josephine moved to join him, her hand finding his without conscious thought. His fingers closed around hers, warm and reassuring. "This is legal land," Zach called back, his voice carrying clearly across the morning air. "And you are trespassing. Turn around now, and we will forget this ever happened." "We have our orders," the leader said. "The boss wants this claim, and what the boss wants, he gets. Now we can do this easy, or we can do it hard. Your choice." Josephine felt Zach tense beside her, felt the barely restrained violence coiling in his frame. But before he could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "I do not think you will be doing it at all, Murphy." Everyone turned. A man rode toward them from the direction of Vulture City, and Josephine recognized the silver star pinned to his vest. Marshal Webb, the only law in this part of Arizona territory, and he did not look pleased. Behind him rode 2 deputies, both armed with rifles. The leader, Murphy, shifted in his saddle. "This is private business, Marshal, between the mining company and these squatters." "Squatters?" Marshal Webb pulled up his horse and fixed Murphy with a hard stare. "Miss Zimmerman has legal papers filed with the territory. I checked them myself after I heard reports about the Garrett Company's activities in this area. So unless you have proof her claim is invalid, you and your men are the ones breaking the law." The boss said, "I do not care what your boss said." The marshal's voice was iron. "I care about territorial law, and the law says you are trespassing on legally held land with clear intent to intimidate and possibly harm. Now you have two choices. You can ride out of here peaceful and tell your boss that if he wants this claim, he can make a legal offer to purchase it. Or I can arrest every last one of you for attempted claim jumping, and you can explain to a judge why you thought might makes right in the Arizona territory." Murphy's face flushed dark red, but he was smart enough to recognize when he was beaten. "You have not heard the last of this," he spat, though Josephine noticed he directed his venom at the marshal, not at her or Zach. Apparently getting knocked unconscious had taught him something about picking his battles. "I hope I have heard the last of it," Marshal Webb said calmly. "Because next time I hear about the Garrett Company harassing legal claim holders, I am going to have a very serious conversation with your boss about operating licenses and the consequences of breaking territorial law. We clear?" Murphy jerked his head in a nod, wheeled his horse, and led his men away at a gallop. The dust had barely settled before Josephine sagged against Zach in relief, and his arm came around her shoulders, solid and grounding. Marshal Webb dismounted and approached them, his weathered face creasing in a tired smile. "Sorry I did not get here sooner, Miss Zimmerman. I was out at Fort McDowell dealing with some supply theft, or I would have come the first time these coyotes showed up." "How did you know to come today?" Josephine asked. "Town gossip," the marshal said, then nodded at Zach. "Word got around that the mountain hermit came down from his cabin to help you, and that he drove off 6 armed men with his bare hands. Figured if the story was even half true, the Garrett Company would not take that lying down. So I kept an eye out, and sure enough, I saw Murphy gathering a small army this morning." Zach's arm was still around Josephine, and she was acutely aware of how perfectly she fit against his side. "Appreciate you riding out here, Marshal." "Just doing my job." Marshal Webb studied them both with knowing eyes. "Miss Zimmerman, I know you have had a rough time of it since your father passed, but it seems to me you have found yourself a good ally. And Mr. Livingston, it is good to see you taking an interest in the world again. Been too long since you came down from those mountains." After the marshal and his deputies left, Josephine and Zach stood together in the quiet of mid-morning, neither quite ready to break apart. Finally, she pulled back just enough to look up at him. "Thank you," she said softly. "Again. I seem to be saying that a lot lately." "You do not have to thank me every time," Zach said, but he did not remove his arm from her shoulders. "I'm right where I want to be." "In a dusty mining claim in the middle of nowhere?" she teased, trying to lighten the intensity of the moment. "With you," he corrected, and the simple honesty of it stole her breath. "If I am being truthful, Josephine, I have not felt this alive, this connected to another person, in more years than I can count. You have reminded me what it means to have something worth fighting for." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Zach, I know it has only been just over a week," he said quickly. "I know this probably sounds crazy, but up in those mountains, I learned to trust my instincts, and my instincts are telling me that you are someone special, someone I could spend my whole life getting to know and never get tired of learning new things about." Josephine's eyes burned with tears that were not from sadness. "I have been alone for so long," she whispered. "Even before my father died, I was alone in a way that mattered. No one ever saw me the way you do, like I am strong instead of stubborn, capable instead of contrary." "You are all of those things," Zach said, reaching up to brush a strand of dark hair from her face. His touch was feather light despite the calluses on his hands, and she shivered. "Strong and stubborn and capable, and the most beautiful woman I have ever laid eyes on." "I am covered in dirt and wearing men's trousers," she protested weakly. "I know," he said, and his smile was devastating. "Beautiful." She rose on her toes, barely thinking, driven by an impulse that felt as natural as breathing. He met her halfway, bending down to close the distance between them, and when their lips met, it felt like coming home. The kiss was gentle at first, questioning, but when she sighed and melted into him, it deepened into something that made her toes curl in her worn boots. His arms came fully around her, lifting her off the ground as if she weighed nothing, and she wrapped her own arms around his neck, losing herself in the taste and feel of him. He kissed like he did everything else, with complete focus and intensity, and she felt cherished and desired in a way she had never experienced. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I am courting you now," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "officially. And when you are ready, when you are sure, I am going to ask you to marry me, just so we are clear about my intentions." Josephine laughed, the sound bright and joyous in the desert air. "You're very direct, Mr. Livingston. Life is too short and too uncertain to waste time dancing around what I want," he said. "And what I want is you, in every way, for the rest of my life. But I will court you proper first, give you time to be sure. I am not going anywhere." "Good," she said, and kissed him again because she could, because this magnificent, gentle, fierce man wanted her, and that felt like a miracle. "Because I think I am going to need help working this claim for a very long time." The weeks that followed were the happiest of Josephine's life. She and Zach fell into a rhythm that felt as natural as the sunrise. They worked the claim during the day, and in the evenings they would sit by the fire and talk for hours. He taught her to track game and read weather signs in the clouds. She taught him to read better, stumbling through the few books she had brought from Philadelphia, and was delighted to discover he had a quick mind that soaked up knowledge like parched earth soaking up rain. And they grew closer in all the ways that mattered. Stolen kisses became longer embraces. Holding hands became sleeping curled together by the fire, proper but intimate in a way that made her feel safe and cherished. She learned the geography of his face, the scars on his hands that told stories of his hard life. He learned that she hummed when she was concentrating, that she was ticklish behind her knees, that she cried when she was angry because the emotion had nowhere else to go. The claim began to produce more gold as Zach's strength and experience helped them dig deeper, shore up the walls properly, follow the vein where Josephine had been too inexperienced to know where to look. They made trips to town together, selling their findings at the assayer's office, and Josephine noticed the way people's attitudes toward her changed. She was no longer the foolish woman playing at mining. She was Zach Livingston's woman, and that meant something in Vulture City. She should have bristled at being defined by a man, at needing his presence to be taken seriously. But the truth was, she did not mind because it was mutual. He needed her just as much as she needed him, in different but equally important ways. She had brought him down from his mountain, had reminded him what it meant to connect with another person. And that was a gift, too. 2 months after they met, on a crisp November evening, Zach went into town alone. He said he needed to pick up supplies, and Josephine spent the afternoon washing clothes in the creek and planning how to extend their digging into the hillside. She was hanging shirts to dry when she heard his horse approaching, and she turned with a smile that faded when she saw his expression. "What is wrong?" she asked immediately, moving toward him. "Did something happen in town?" "Nothing is wrong," Zach said, but his voice was strained, nervous. He dismounted and pulled something from his saddlebag, and when he turned to face her, she saw he was holding a small box. "I know I said I would give you time to be sure, that I would court you proper. And I have tried, Josephine, I swear I have. But I'm not good at waiting, and I cannot go another day without asking you what I have been wanting to ask since about the second day I knew you." Her heart was suddenly in her throat. Zach, he dropped to one knee in the dirt, this mountain of a man making himself vulnerable in a way that made her eyes sting with tears. When he opened the box, she saw a simple gold band with a small but perfect diamond, and her hands flew to her mouth. "I do not have pretty words," he said, looking up at her with those green eyes that saw straight into her soul. "I am not educated or refined like those men you must have known back east. But I love you, Josephine. I love your strength and your stubbornness, and the way you hum when you are concentrating. I love how you fought those claim jumpers even when you were terrified, and how you work this claim every day even though the labor is killing hard. I love who I am when I am with you, and I do not want to be anyone else ever again. So I'm asking, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice?" Tears streamed down Josephine's face, but she was smiling so wide it hurt. "Yes," she gasped. "Yes, of course, yes. You impossible man. I love you too. I have loved you since you drove off those men with your bare hands and then were so gentle when you carried me. Since you respected my claim and my dreams and saw me as a partner instead of a burden. Yes, Zach, Yes to everything. He surged to his feet, lifting her and spinning her around as she laughed through her tears. When he set her down, he slid the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly, and the sight of that small vulnerability in this strong man undid her completely. She pulled him down for a kiss that tasted like salt and joy and promise. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Vulture City, with Marshall Webb standing as witness and half the town in attendance. Josephine wore a simple blue dress she had sewn herself from fabric Zach had bought her as a surprise, and Zach wore new trousers and a shirt that actually fit his massive frame. He looked uncomfortable in the formal clothing, but when he turned to watch her walk down the aisle, the expression on his face made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. "Dearly beloved," the preacher began, but Josephine barely heard the words. She was too focused on Zach, on the way his hands engulfed hers, on the absolute certainty in his eyes as he repeated his vows. When the preacher finally declared them man and wife, Zach kissed her with such tenderness that she heard several women in the congregation sigh. They had a small reception at the town's only hotel, and Josephine found herself surrounded by people who had ignored her when she was alone, but now welcomed her warmly as Mrs. Livingston. It should have bothered her, but she was too happy to care. Zach stayed by her side the entire time, clearly uncomfortable with the crowd, but enduring it for her sake. When an older woman asked him if he planned to take his bride to his mountain cabin, he glanced at Josephine first. "That's up to my wife," he said, and the pride in his voice when he said "my wife" made her heart flutter. "We will go wherever makes her happy." Later that night, in the room Zach had rented for them, he was so careful with her it made her want to cry. He had been clear that he was not inexperienced, that his years in the mountains had included occasional visits to town in the company of women who provided that particular service. But he treated her like she was made of spun glass, asking permission with every touch, every kiss, making sure she felt safe and cherished, even in this most intimate of moments. "I have never done this before," she whispered as he unlaced her dress with shaking fingers. "I do not know what to do." "Neither do I," he said, and she blinked in surprise. He smiled at her expression. "I have been with women before, but I have never made love to my wife, to someone I love more than my own life, so we are both learning, Josephine. We will figure it out together." And they did. It was awkward and overwhelming, and occasionally made them both laugh at their own fumbling, but it was also beautiful and passionate, and left her feeling more connected to him than she had thought possible. Afterward, as she lay wrapped in his arms, her head on his chest listening to his heartbeat, she felt a peace she had never known. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. His arms tightened around her. "I love you too, more than I have words for." They spent a week in town, mostly in that hotel room, learning each other in all the ways that mattered. But eventually, they both grew restless for the work and life they had built together. They returned to the claim, but now Zach's bedroll was in Josephine's tent, and they fell asleep each night wrapped around each other, whispering plans and dreams and promises. The winter was mild that year, and they worked the claim steadily, building up a good savings in the Vulture City Bank. But as the months passed, Josephine began to notice changes in herself. She was tired more easily, her breasts tender, and certain smells that had never bothered her before now made her stomach turn. It was late February when she finally allowed herself to acknowledge what those signs meant. She waited until evening, until they were sitting by the fire after supper, and then she took Zach's hand and placed it low on her belly. "I think we are going to need a bigger tent," she said softly. He looked at her confused, and then understanding dawned in those green eyes. Wonder and terror and joy all mixed together. "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor. But Zach, I am 3 months late for my monthly courses, and I feel exactly like my mother described feeling when she was carrying me. I think our family is growing." His hand spread wide across her stomach, protective and reverent. "A baby," he breathed. "Our baby, Josephine, He stopped, shook his head, and she saw tears gleaming in his eyes. "I never thought I would have this. A wife who loves me, a child, a family. I thought I was always going to be alone." "Never alone again," Josephine promised, leaning into him. "We are building something here, Zach. Not just this claim, but a life, a real life together." They made the trip to Vulture City the next week to see the doctor, who confirmed what Josephine already knew. She was nearly 3 months along and healthy, though the doctor cautioned her about the hard physical labor of mining. Zach took that warning to heart and tried to insist she stop working entirely, which led to their first real argument as a married couple. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Josephine said, hands on her hips. "Women have been working through pregnancy since the beginning of time." "Not my wife," Zach said stubbornly. "Not my child. You could hurt yourself, or the baby could come early, or I could sit around being useless and go mad from boredom," Josephine interrupted. "Zach, I appreciate that you want to protect me. I love that about you. But I need to work. I need to feel useful. Surely we can find a compromise." They did eventually. Josephine agreed to lighter duties, no more swinging the pickaxe or hauling heavy loads. But she could still pan for gold in the creek, could keep track of their finances and supplies, could help with the cooking and maintaining the camp. And Zach threw himself into the heavier work with renewed determination, driven by the need to provide for his growing family. As spring arrived and Josephine's belly grew round, they made plans for the future. They would stay at the claim through the summer, work it as long as they could. But before the baby came in late August, they would move into town. Zach had already spoken with the owner of a small cabin on the outskirts of Vulture City, negotiating a fair price. He wanted Josephine near the doctor when her time came, wanted her to have neighbors and help if she needed it while he was working. "What about your mountain cabin?" Josephine asked one evening as they lay together in their tent, his hand resting on her belly as the baby kicked and rolled. "Do you regret leaving it behind?" "Never," Zach said firmly. "That cabin was a hiding place, not a home. This is home. You are home. Wherever you and this baby are, that is where I want to be." In early June, they received unexpected news. Marshall Webb rode out to the claim with documents that made Josephine's hands shake as she read them. "The Garrett Mining Company is being investigated by the territorial government," the marshal explained. "Turns out you were not the only claim holder they tried to force out. Once I filed my reports, other people came forward too. The company is being fined heavily, and they have been ordered to cease all operations until they can prove they are operating within the law." "What does this mean for us?" Zach asked, his arm protectively around Josephine's shoulders. "Means you do not have to worry about them anymore," Marshall Webb said with satisfaction. "The owner, Garrett himself, is facing criminal charges. Even if the company survives, which I doubt, they will not be bothering small claim holders like you folks again." After the marshal left, Josephine and Zach stood together looking at their claim, at the small but steady operation they had built together. It felt like vindication, like all their hard work and determination had finally paid off. "We did it," she said softly. "We actually did it." "You did it," Zach corrected. "You were the one who refused to be driven off, who stood your ground when most people would have run. I just helped." "You did more than help," Josephine said, turning to face him. "You saved my life, Zach, in more ways than one. Before you came along, I was just surviving, just existing day to day. You taught me what it means to truly live." He kissed her then, tender and sweet, one hand cradling her rounded belly. "We taught each other," he said against her lips. "Now let us go build that life we have been talking about." They moved into the Vulture City cabin in mid-July, and Josephine spent the next month nesting, as Zach called it with amused affection. She sewed curtains for the windows, organized their supplies, and set up a small nursery in the corner of the bedroom. Zach built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk, and Josephine lined it with soft blankets she had traded for at the general store. The baby came on a sweltering August afternoon, 3 weeks before the doctor had predicted. Zach had been at the claim, doing a final survey before they decided whether to keep working it or sell. By the time he got the message and raced back to town, Josephine was already deep in labor, attended by the doctor and 2 neighbor women who had experience with birthing. He burst into the cabin looking wild-eyed and terrified, and Josephine, even through the pain, managed to laugh at his expression. "I am fine," she gasped between contractions. "The baby is just impatient, like its father." Zach held her hand through the remaining hours, letting her squeeze until she thought she might break his fingers, murmuring encouragement and looking like he might faint every time she cried out. But when the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, He wept openly. "A boy," the doctor announced, placing the tiny bundle in Josephine's arms. "A big, healthy boy. 10 pounds if he is an ounce." Josephine looked down at her son, at the shock of dark hair and the powerful grip of his tiny fingers, and felt her heart expand to accommodate this new, overwhelming love. When she looked up at Zach, she saw the same wonder reflected in his face. "He looks like you," she said softly. "Same green eyes, same stubborn chin." "Pray he got your brains to go with it," Zach said, reaching out to touch the baby's cheek with one gentle finger. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names endlessly over the past months, but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking at this perfect tiny person, Josephine knew exactly what his name should be. "Samuel," she said. "Samuel James Livingston, after both our fathers." Zach's eyes went bright with tears again. "Samuel," he repeated, "it is perfect. He is perfect. You are perfect. I do not know what I did to deserve this, but I promise I will spend every day of my life being worthy of it." The first months of parenthood were exhausting and overwhelming and filled with more love than Josephine had thought possible. Samuel was a good baby, healthy and strong, and he grew like a weed. Zach was a devoted father, unafraid of dirty diapers or midnight feedings. Josephine would wake sometimes to find him sitting in the rocking chair, their son cradled in his massive arms, singing soft songs in a surprisingly good voice. They sold the claim in October to a mining company out of Phoenix, one with a good reputation and fair practices. The sale gave them enough money to live comfortably for several years, and Zach used some of it to buy a plot of land on the edge of town where he planned to build them a real house. "With a proper bedroom," he told Josephine as they walked the property together, Samuel bundled against her chest in a sling Zach had fashioned. "And a big kitchen for you, and a porch where we can sit in the evenings, room for Samuel to run when he gets bigger, and for any brothers or sisters that might come along." "More children?" Josephine teased, though the idea made her warm. "You are planning ahead, Mr. Livingston." "I am planning a future," he corrected, pulling her close and kissing the top of her head. "Our future. For the first time in my life, I am not just surviving day to day, I'm building something that will last." They broke ground on the house in November, and by Christmas the frame was up. Zach did most of the work himself, his experience with his mountain cabin serving him well. Men from town came to help occasionally, and Josephine noticed how much Zach had changed in the year since they had met. He was still quiet and reserved, but he no longer shied away from company. He had friends now, connections to the community. He had a family, and that changed everything. The house was completed in early spring, and moving day was chaos and joy in equal measure. Samuel, now 8 months old and crawling everywhere, explored every corner of their new home with determined enthusiasm. Josephine arranged furniture and hung pictures while Zach built shelves and cabinets, and by evening, the house actually felt like a home. That night, after Samuel was asleep in his new nursery, Josephine and Zach sat together on their new porch, watching the sun set over the desert. He had his arm around her, and she leaned into his solid warmth, feeling more content than she had ever imagined possible. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked quietly. "Your mountain cabin? The solitude?" "No," Zach said immediately. "I thought I wanted to be alone, but I was just afraid. Afraid of losing people the way I lost my parents. Afraid of being hurt. You taught me that loving someone, building a life with them, is worth the risk. Worth everything." Josephine turned to kiss him, slow and deep, and felt the familiar spark of desire kindle between them. It had been months since Samuel's birth before the doctor had cleared her for intimacy, and even now, with a baby in the house, they had to be creative about finding private moments. But the passion between them had not dimmed at all. If anything, it had grown stronger, deepened by the love and partnership they had built. "I want another one," she whispered against his lips. "Another baby." "Is that crazy? Samuel's not even a year old." "Not crazy," Zach assured her. "I want a house full of children, want to fill that nursery in every other room, want to build something so big and full of love that it spills over into everything we do." So they tried for another baby, and Josephine fell pregnant again in the summer when Samuel was 14 months old and toddling everywhere on sturdy legs. This pregnancy was easier. Her her body more prepared, and she continued to work around their home and garden without issue. Zach had taken a job at one of the legitimate mining operations outside town, his strength and experience making him valuable. But he always came home in the evenings, always put his family first. Their second child, a daughter, was born in early March during a rare spring rain. She came faster than Samuel had, and this time Zach was there from the beginning, holding Josephine through every contraction, steady and strong and exactly what she needed. "A girl," the doctor said, and Josephine heard the wonder in Zach's voice when he repeated it. "A daughter. Josephine, we have a daughter." The baby was smaller than Samuel had been, delicate and perfect with a shock of dark hair like her father and eyes that would eventually settle into the same deep green. They named her Margaret Rose, after Josephine's mother, and Zach was absolutely besotted. He held his tiny daughter like she was made of spun glass, terrified he might break her with his massive hands. But Margaret seemed to sense his gentleness. She was a calm baby, content to sleep in her father's arms for hours. Life settled into a rhythm. Samuel grew into a strong, curious toddler who followed his father everywhere, trying to imitate everything Zach did. Margaret grew from a calm baby into a determined little girl who knew exactly what she wanted and was not afraid to make it known. And Josephine, watching her husband play with their children in the yard of their home, felt a happiness so profound it sometimes brought tears to her eyes. The years passed quickly. Samuel started school in Vulture City, reading at a level far beyond his classmates, because both his parents had spent hours teaching him. Margaret proved to have her mother's stubborn independence and her father's strength, and she was not content to sit quietly while Samuel got to do all the interesting things. Zach built her a small workbench where she could hammer and saw alongside him, and Josephine taught her to sew and cook, though Margaret was always more interested in being outdoors. When Samuel was 7 and Margaret 5, Josephine found herself pregnant again. This time it was twins, another boy and a girl, and the pregnancy was difficult. She was confined to bed rest for the last 2 months, and Zach took time off work to care for her and the older children. It was the hardest time they had faced since those first days at the mining claim, but they faced it together, and that made all the difference. The twins, David and Elizabeth, were born healthy in late November, just before Thanksgiving. Zach held one in each arm, looking between them and his wife with an expression of such overwhelming love that Josephine had to look away before she started crying. 4 children, he said softly. 4 perfect, healthy children. Josephine, you have given me everything I never knew I wanted. We gave it to each other, she corrected, reaching up to touch his face. Every bit of this life we built together. As the years continued to pass, their family thrived. Samuel grew tall and strong like his father, with the same quiet intensity and gentle heart. Margaret became known throughout Vulture City as the girl who could outwork and outthink most of the boys her age, and she took fierce pride in being Zach Livingston's daughter. The twins were inseparable, always getting into some adventure or another, and kept their parents on their toes. Zach and Josephine grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They still worked side by side, now in the large garden Josephine had cultivated, and in the woodshop Zach had built where he crafted furniture to sell. They still found moments alone, still came together with the same passion that had marked their early days, though now it was laced with a comfortable familiarity that made it even sweeter. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zach surprised Josephine with a trip back to the mining claim. It had been years since they had visited, and she was shocked to see how much had changed. The area had been developed, with several successful mines operating and a small community growing up around them. But their original claim, the place where they had met and fought and fallen in love, was untouched. Zach had bought it back from the mining company, had kept it all these years without telling her. Why, she asked, tears streaming down her face as they stood on the rocky hillside where he had first saved her. Because this is where our story started, Zach said simply. This is where I found you, or maybe where you found me. Either way, it is sacred ground as far as I am concerned, and I thought maybe someday, when we are old and gray, we could build a little cabin up here. Come stay sometimes and remember what it was like to be young and desperate and so in love we could hardly breathe. We are still that in love, Josephine said, wrapping her arms around him. Maybe even more so. You are still the man who drove off 6 armed men for a woman he barely knew, who built a life and a family from nothing but determination and love. You are still my hero, Zach Livingston. And you are still the bravest woman I have ever known, he said, holding her close. The woman who refused to be driven off her land, who worked a claim alone when everyone said it was impossible. The woman who took a chance on a rough mountain man and somehow made him into something better. They made love there on the hillside, where they had fallen in love, under the wide Arizona sky, and it felt like coming full circle, like their story was complete, even though Josephine knew they had many more years ahead of them. They returned home to their children and their life in Vulture City, but Josephine carried the memory of that anniversary close to her heart. It reminded her of how far they had come, how much they had built together, from that first terrifying dawn when claim jumpers had come with ropes and rifles, to this life filled with love and family and purpose. The children grew and eventually started families of their own. Samuel married a schoolteacher from Phoenix and settled in Vulture City, building a house not far from his parents. Margaret shocked everyone by refusing several proper suitors and instead marrying a Shoshone man she met while traveling with her father to Fort McDowell. Zach approved wholeheartedly, remembering his own time with the tribe and respecting the strength and honor of his son-in-law. The twins went off to university in California, the first in their family to pursue higher education, but they came home every summer and eventually returned permanently to practice law together in Vulture City. And through it all, Zach and Josephine remained the center of their growing family, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They grew old together, Zach's dark hair turning silver, but his strength never truly fading. Josephine's face gained lines that told stories of laughter and tears and a life fully lived. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people who had fallen in love over a mining claim in the wild Arizona desert. On a warm evening in late September, exactly 30 years after the day they had met, Zach and Josephine sat together on their porch. They were grandparents now, with 12 grandchildren who called them Grandma and Pop and climbed all over Zach's still broad frame like he was a favorite piece of furniture. The house was finally quiet after a big family dinner, and they held hands watching the sunset in shades of gold and crimson. "Do you remember the first thing I said to you?" Zach asked softly. Josephine smiled. "You asked if I was hurt." "And you said you were fine," Zach continued. "Even though you were shaking so hard I thought you might fly apart. You've always been like that, brave even when you were terrified." "I learned from the best," Josephine said, squeezing his hand. "You taught me that being afraid and being brave are not opposites. That courage is what you do despite the fear." "We taught each other," Zach said, repeating the words he had spoken so long ago. "Everything good in my life, I learned from you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Josephine said, "If you could go back and do it all again, would you change anything?" Zach was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he shook his head. "Not a single thing. Every hard moment, every struggle, it all led us here, to this life, this family, and I would not trade that for anything." "Even those first days," Josephine asked, "when the claim jumpers came at dawn with their ropes and rifles, when you had to fight them off with your bare hands?" "Especially those days," Zach said firmly, "because that is when I found you. That is when my real life began." Josephine rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart that had been her home for 3 decades. "I love you," she whispered. "Then, now, always." "Always," Zach agreed and kissed the top of her head. "Through everything life has thrown at us, we have faced it together, and that is how I want to spend whatever time we have left, together, hand in hand, just like this." The sun set fully, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky, and they sat together in the peaceful twilight. Around them, the desert breathed and settled into night, and inside their home, their legacy slept in the form of children and grandchildren who would carry their story forward. But in this moment, it was just the two of them, the mountain man and the mining woman who had found each other when they both needed saving, and who had built something beautiful from the ashes of their individual struggles. Their story had started with violence and fear, with claim jumpers coming at dawn, armed with ropes and rifles. but it had transformed into something else entirely, something that spoke to the power of courage and love, and the determination to build rather than destroy. Zach had driven those men off with his hands, but what he and Josephine had built together required so much more than physical strength. It required patience and compromise, laughter and tears, the daily choice to love each other even when it was hard. And they had made that choice every single day for 30 years, would continue making it for however many years they had left, because they had learned, in that rocky Arizona desert under the harsh sun and the cold stars, that love was not just a feeling. It was an action, a commitment, a decision to stand together against whatever came. The claim jumpers had come at dawn with their ropes and rifles, intending to drive Josephine off her land and out of their territory. Instead, they had inadvertently brought her exactly what she needed, delivered in the form of a mountain man who fought with his hands and loved with his whole heart. And from that violent beginning had grown this beautiful life, this family, this story that their grandchildren would tell their own children someday. As the stars wheeled overhead and the desert wind whispered through the sage, Zach and Josephine Livingston sat together on their porch, hands clasped, hearts entwined, and knew that they had won everything that truly mattered. They had fought for their land, for their love, for the right to build a life on their own terms, and they had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams, creating something that would endure long after they were gone. This was their legacy, not gold or land or money, though they had enough of those things to be comfortable, but love, passed down through generations, courage, taught by example. The knowledge that no matter how dark the dawn, no matter how many enemies gather with their ropes and rifles, there is always hope if you are willing to fight for it, if you are willing to believe that something better is possible. Zach had driven those claim jumpers off with his bare hands, but it was love that had truly saved them both, love that had transformed two lonely, damaged people into a family, a legacy, a story worth telling. And as they sat together in the peaceful Arizona night, surrounded by the life they had built and the love they had nurtured, they knew that their story had the best possible ending. They had each other. They had their family. And they had the unshakable knowledge that whatever came next, they would face it together, hand in hand, heart to heart, just as they always had. The claim jumpers had come at dawn 30 years ago, intending to destroy. Instead, they had been the catalyst for creation, for a love story that would echo through the ages, a testament to the power of courage and determination and the transformative nature of true love. And that, Josephine thought as she snuggled closer to her husband under the star-filled sky, was the greatest victory of all.